Hello, tribe. Hey, everybody out there. I wanted to continue with stories from the Holodomor. And that was a time when Stalin was starving the farmers into submission, into collectivizing. And those who didn't want to collectivize were called kulaks. They were called rich people, and so therefore they were preyed upon by the bureaucrats, if you want to call it that. So some of these people survived for quite a while. Most of them children, and stories were collected, and you can get all these stories off of ucc.ca. I want to read a few more because it's very important to understand what famine does. And it's not just famine. Stalin's famine, Mao's famine, Pol Pot, certain places in Africa, these were all famines by edicts. It wasn't that food wasn't there. The food was there. It was being used as a weapon to conform. I see that coming here. If you read Anne Applebaum's Red Famine, I just got through with it. It's really, really important to read that and understand how regulations were used to control people and to force them to do things they didn't want to do, which was essentially become communists. The same thing's happening here. A lot of the kulaks said we can't meet these impossible demands and feed our families, so we're just going to quit and we're going to go into the city and get a factory job. Well, that presents a problem because the people in the factory eat because the farmers farm. So they had to make laws that said that, yes, you're free to go anywhere you want because communism is wonderful. However, you have to have an internal passport because there are bad people out there trying to infiltrate. And in order to travel from city to city or from your little village to go to a city looking for food, you must have the prior permission from your local commissar, who never gave permission. So without that passport and without the commissar's permission, the stamp in your passport, you were not allowed to go to cities and look for food. Being caught in the city and looking for food got you into big trouble. You got you beat, got you shot. A lot of people were just put on trucks and they were in such sad shape they were taken out of the city in these trucks and dumped off far enough to where they knew they would not be able to walk back to the city, and yet not close enough to their village that they were not going to be able to make it there, and they all died on the roads. You think that can't happen here, but let me ask you this. Do you remember just a few years ago the push for vaccine passports? Do you still want to tell me that can't happen here? Change the names. The tyranny is the same. Bureaucratic tyrants will never stop. They simply change the name and press forward. So I'm going to read you some stories here. Now, these are just words. Words cannot immerse you in what these people went through, their daily lives. Saying something like, my stomach was swollen, cannot convey to you the gnawing, tearing hunger that they went through every single day. Understand this is coming to the United States. Food will be used as a weapon. The communists, the socialists are not going to stop. You need to be ready for this. And part of being ready for it is understanding what it will be like. And that will, I hope, spur you on to get better prepared for what is coming. I'm going to read a couple stories here. First one is Natalia Talenchuk. She was born February 14th, 1925 in Dnipropetrovsk City. And she describes villagers coming to Dnipropetrovsk in search of food during the Holodomor. Natalia Talenchuk. The children of the directors of factories, the children of the communist elite, vacationed there in the school across the street from our house. There was a summer cafeteria there, and during the famine, villagers came there searching for food. They had eaten everything in the village, nettle, cats, so they came and rummaged through the garbage from the cafeteria at night. Interviewer, you saw this? Natalia replies, I saw this, and I asked my mother what they were doing there during the night. My mother explained to me that they were collecting potato peels, apple cores, and so forth. In the mornings, my mother didn't let me look out the window because I saw people who had died sitting under our fence. Our front windows looked out onto the street, and my mother forbid me to look out those windows. My mother cried, and I asked her why she was crying. Later on, she delicately told me why. You weren't allowed to even talk about the famine. It was against the law to talk about it. The famine was a big secret. I was already going to school, and a little boy had a huge swollen belly. I asked what was wrong with him. My classmates told me that he had a big family and didn't have anything to eat. I saw swollen children in our class. I'm haunted by all this to this day. I've been carrying this in my heart and memory for almost 80 years and telling children about this. This affects my whole life. I can't throw out a piece of bread. I can't. I dream about those women who came to our door with their little children asking for a piece of bread because their children were dying. My mother often gave them some. Let's talk about that one for a second here. You weren't allowed to even talk about the famine. In last episode, we learned about the lady whose father was taking the numbers of the deaths, and famine was not allowed to be listed as a means of death. It had to be exhaustion or something else. Does that sound familiar to you? You still think things like this cannot happen here? Remember COVID? Remember the story of the guy who was decapitated in an automobile accident? And because he was taken to the hospital for a death certificate, the hospital had to test him for COVID. And because he tested positive for COVID with a faulty PCR test, the regulations had been rewritten that if someone tested positive for COVID and they died, the cause of death had to be listed as COVID-19, even though you died in a car accident. You still think that can't happen here? You need to educate yourself on history because history is repeating itself here in the United States of America. These great events don't just happen. The great event of this Holodomor, of the communization of the Soviet Union, didn't just happen overnight. It was decades and decades that led up to it. The American Revolution didn't happen overnight. It took decades of building up of resentment and more little things piled on top and piled on top and piled on top until it became unbearable. These things can happen here in the United States, and they already are happening. You are being programmed to accept. Get that through your head. Read history. It is vitally important that you understand what is coming. Because what is coming does not care if you are ready for it. It's coming anyways. And because of the incremental ingress into your freedoms, you think it doesn't really matter, but it does. Because things happen slowly and then suddenly. Okay, now let's hear from Mikola Zabolanti. Born on the 9th of June, 1921, Kulihi village, Vinnytsia Oblast. He describes the pressure put on farmers by the government and trials of farmers in his village. My father worked at the state farm, not the collective farm, so the pressure to which he was subjected was different. For example, they called him a kulak. They didn't let him graze his cow on collective farmland. We had to graze our cow by the road, in the ditches. We had to give 180 liters of milk a year, double what the collective farmers had to give, which was 90 liters. In 1932, people who didn't join the collective farm but had their own horses were taxed in the following way. They had to transport rocks for building roads. Both the people and the horses were malnourished, and the work was hard, so people set their horses free. In 1932, horses roamed the fields like wild horses. People refused their horses. Because the horses were unfed and starving, sometimes they died in the field. That's how they put pressure on people. By 1933, they went around with rods, searching for grain. They took everything. Even if something was baking in the oven, they would take it or throw it away. There were many arrests during dekulakization. They established a court in our school. I saw the trials. They accused those poor people who had brought from the prison in Lidin of being exploiters. What kind of exploiters were they? They simply had their own farms and hired people to help them during the harvest. The people they hired should have been thankful that they could earn something. But for Soviet power, they were exploiters. They organized the collective farm in my grandfather's house. They arrested him, his wife, and his youngest son, Metolidi, took them to prison, and they never came back. That's what's coming. Get ready for it. Let's hear another one. Let's hear from Sophia. Sophia Seelan, born 20th of October, 1921, Krinichin village, Kharkiv region, describes what she ate during the Holodomor and the death of children in her village from starvation. When I was a year old, my father died. When I was 2, my mother died. So my mother's brother raised me. When the famine was starting and they were dekulakizing people, my other uncle was dekulakized first. One of my cousins came to live with us, and I lived with my uncle because I didn't have parents. So us 2 cousins were raised by my uncle. He had 4 of his own children, and my grandfather, and a younger son. Interviewer, in one house? In one house. When the famine started, first the youngest son died because there was no food. Then my grandfather died. They came and took the cow, the pigs. They were carrying out a trunk. My aunt ran after them, asking them to leave her a blanket at least. He said, "The sun will warm you." Interviewer, you remember this? I remember this, and I will probably not forget it until I die. My uncle buried some potatoes, cabbage, onions, whatever he could, in the yard, and that's what we ate. Then, in the spring, the authorities went around with rods and with sharpened ends and searched the ground for fresh earth. They dug up what my uncle buried and took it away. So then we had nothing. We split up. Everyone was swollen. I was swollen. The skin on my legs was cracking. We went around, and in the spring, tore leaves off linden trees to eat. We would sleep in the school. There was no straw or anything to sleep on. We slept on the floor. When we got up, some of the children had died. Later, when we started to swell from hunger and our skin began to crack, we didn't go to school anymore. We slept on the side of the road. Lesson from that is to bury your food deep and provide cover so that it doesn't look fresh. Be creative. Be creative. God bless you all. Get ready. Remember, go, go, go. Time is short.